It is the 109th episode of Decoding Fox News, and I'm your host, Juliet Jeske. Each week, I watch and analyze a whole heck of a lot of Fox News and then break it down. I watch all the Fox News you'd never want to. Let's get into it. Trump's Chick-Fil-A fake out with a bunch of racist garbage and the death of O.J. Simpson.
It's not sinking in. And if anybody's a threat to democracy, we can play that game. It's Joe Biden. I mean, his buddies at the CIA and FBI interfered in the last election. They're still blocking investigations into the Biden crimes. So I don't like playing that game. I don't think that game is effective. I agree with Dana. This is about the economy. Stupid. The Chick-Fil-A event. This was an event to behold. Now, everything you've heard about Donald Trump in the press is that he's like this dangerous racist. He waltzes in there, orders food, and about a dozen African-American women flock to him and take selfies. African-American women, the most loyal voting bloc of the Democratic Party. He has them giggling. He has them lining up. He says, "Mom, I'm famous now." It's all love in the Chick-fil-A. Now, if he can just do this, I would run the Chick-fil-A campaign.
That's a great idea.
I would just go to as many restaurants, grocery stores, malls as I could, and just have regular Americans swarm him, embrace him, and love him. And that is what is going to win him the election.
Like Tiffany.
You know,
Who's Tiffany?
Joe wouldn't do that.
So I've got a plan for you, Jesse Waters, and that plan would be, you know what? Why are we just saying grocery stores? What Chick-fil-A's? What? No. Let's be bold. Let's be daring. Let's make a move. And I say that move is the coffee shop tour in blue cities. You start with Brooklyn, and then we move on to pretty much the entire state of Vermont, because that would go well. The entire state of Vermont. Then we move down to Baltimore, move over to Chicago, hit San Francisco on the West Coast, because that would be brilliant. Just waltz in to the most hippy-dippy coffee shop in San Francisco. You know there's like one every block. You go to those coffee shops and just be like, "Hey, my people, what's up?" See what happens. Go down to Los Angeles and then Austin, Texas would be brilliant. I think they'd love you. I think also he should specifically find places that are like vegan oat milk only establishments. Like, we don't even look at a cow. If it came from an animal, it does not enter this establishment. I'm wearing vinyl shoes. That type of, I'm not making fun of vegans. I'm a vegetarian. I'm just saying, like, let's go all the way to extreme, as left-wing possible as we could possibly get, and then put Trump in those situations. Love to see it. Love to see that reaction. Because, you know, we get plenty of beating up on Joe Biden. Let's put Trump in an uncomfortable situation, shall we? I think that would be fun. Of course, we'd make sure everybody was safe. We'd make, because again, hippie vegans are probably not going to attack you. They might scold you or lecture you about your dietary choices. And again, I don't. I actually know a lot of vegans who wouldn't, but I'm just joking here. Lecture you maybe about phlegm and dairy and how dairy is not great for phlegm production. I'm just riffing. Okay, so let's get into it. So last week, Fox News tried to make a lot out of a completely staged Trump campaign event in Atlanta while dredging up memories of one of the most sensational criminal trials in the U.S. involving O.J. Simpson and his well-paid legal dream team. Fox also promoted hatred and xenophobia towards migrants, while Jesse Waters made a terrible argument against slavery reparations, and the network also aggressively promoted Donald J. Trump's candidacy for president while trashing President Biden. Anyone watching Fox News exclusively last week might have missed out on developments in the war in Ukraine, a program to increase domestic production of semiconductor chips, and alarming data about climate change. Shows I covered last week: Fox and Friends, The Five, and Jesse Waters Primetime. So we're going to move on to the Chick-fil-A fake out. And I'm going to just play a video that I made. And as I was making this, right after I dropped it, even though it still performed really well, pretty much on every platform I put it on, I've discovered the entire internet also discovered this and made videos about it. And when I say the entire internet, I mean the entire internet. Like Midas Touch, they did a follow-up. They did a video and they did a follow-up. I can't list everybody, but it was like everybody with a platform in social media, they were just slightly left of center, was like, that was a bogus, fake campaign event that you tried to make look like a spontaneous event. So here's my version of the debunking of the Trump Chick-fil-A fake out. So by now you may have seen a news segment that included Donald J. Trump spontaneously walking into a Chick-fil-A and being welcomed with open arms by random black people.
The Chick-fil-A event. This was an event to behold. Now, everything you've heard about Donald Trump in the press is that he's like this dangerous racist. He waltzes in there, orders food, and about a dozen African-American women flock to him and take selfies.
It didn't seem spontaneous to me for a number of reasons. First, the Secret Service would have to go in and do a sweep of the area to make sure that nobody was armed or a threat to the former president. So two of my buddies over on Threads, Oliver Willis of American Independent and Craig Harrison at Media Matters, did a little bit of detective work and posted it. And I said, I'm making a video. So here's the video.
No matter what the media tells you, Mr. Trump, we support you. We love you. Okay, 4 p.m. We've been 4 p.m.
Come here, let me give you a hug.
So that woman's name is Michaela Montgomery, and she is a political consultant. Here is her resume on LinkedIn. So here it says she's the founder of Conserve the Culture, which is a grassroots organization, and that will be confirmed in a moment. She's also worked with the Blexit Foundation, which was founded by Candace Owens, who most Republicans would even call an extremist. Point out here this is the description of her job. She says she does things called hype squads and social media, which this might have been a hype squad. It's hard to know. Now, she also met with Lawrence Jones to talk about this incident, and she said this.
Young woman herself, Michaela Montgomery. She's also the founder of a grassroots political group to conserve the culture.
He's very welcome. People were excited to see him. People showed up in support of him. And people, of course, were from all 4 institutions within the AUC, the local HBCU community in Atlanta, and they all showed up in support of him.
So based on the language she used there, that did not look at all spontaneous. It looked like it was a well-organized, pre-planned event, which is perfectly fine if they were transparent about it, which of course they were not. So when I say, again, everybody on the internet caught this story, the AP, the Associated Press, did an article about it, and they actually tracked down Montgomery and interviewed her. And they had a quote in there where she basically said she was disappointed. This is amazing. That the Trump campaign, or, she basically said the media, but it was the Trump campaign who did this, made it look like it was a spontaneous event because she had worked so hard to organize it and coordinate it. So, oops, yeah, they used you, dear. I'm sorry. I'm sure she's still a huge Trump fan and does not see it as a slight to her. But yes, they definitely made this. They tried to present it as he just walked into a Chick-fil-A and everybody loved him, which that is highly unlikely given the demographic in the Chick-fil-A. And just, one sign that you could tell it was completely fake is when Montgomery greeted Trump. She ran up to him and gave him this huge hug and then I've made it, mama, I've made it, and made some comments. If she was not pre-screened by the Secret Service and that area was not pre-screened by the Secret Service and she approached the former president in an aggressive manner like that and put her arms around him, she would have been thrown to the ground. I'm not kidding. I've seen instances where I've seen a couple instances where a president or former president is approached by someone in an aggressive manner and the Secret Service don't know who this person is and they have no idea if this person is armed. They've thrown them to the ground. They have literally just pounced on them and been like, no, you can't do that. Now, in a situation where they have already checked for weapons and this one was obviously staged, it was already planned, they knew she wasn't a threat to the president, so there was no reason to pounce on her. So that just absolutely ridiculous. And of course, Fox acted like this was this beautiful moment. Now, again, in 2015, and this has been widely reported on, but I'm a person who lives in New York and I used to be a performer. So I know this is true 100% because I saw it with my own two eyes. They put out a casting notice for fake promoters or fans of Trump when he announced his candidacy in 2015. So those people in Trump Tower with signs that said like "We love Trump" were fake. They were actors who were paid money, and I know people who did it. And they feel bad about it because they don't like Trump, but they did it because they thought it was going to be funny. They thought it was a joke. So yeah, this is sort of Trump's MO, like a fake campaign event. So I just want to apologize for this newsletter and podcast being really late this week. Very briefly, I don't want to waste too much time on this. I have a new CPA. I'm self-employed. Self-employed people hire accountants because our taxes are a nightmare. And if we screw them up, we could pay thousands of dollars to the IRS. I already pay thousands of dollars to the IRS. I can't get into this, but if you're self-employed, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay. Doesn't mean I make a lot of money. This means I have to pay a lot of taxes. So yesterday, this new person that I employed that I already paid a month ago to do my tax returns had set it up so my tax returns would come out of my checking account without telling me. And I had already paid both federal and state a while ago. So I got hit with a horrible surprise on Monday. It was an absolute nightmare. I spent hours on the phone with the feds and the state of New York. I'm still not really over it. It was so traumatic because I didn't have the money. And luckily, I didn't bounce too many things. I only bounced one payment, and my bank's going to reimburse me for that. But it took me a while to even figure out what had happened. So it's been really, really ugly. Then some person came at me on Threads over this because they didn't understand that most self-employed people hire an accountant. That's just par for the course. And it was a bizarre attack that didn't help my frame of mind at all. So my apologies. And if you've been through tax hell, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Like I hope I'm going to have to change accounts. It was that traumatic. So they never do that again. So anyway, and if you had a good tax day, I'm very, very happy for you. If you have a W-2 job and you can just file easy form, you are so incredibly blessed. I haven't been able to do that since like 2002. I've been self-employed. So yay for self-employed people out there. Anyway, we're going to move on to O.J. Simpson because, you know, that's really frolic in the park. I'm being sarcastic. This one killed me. So O.J. Simpson died last week, and I don't want to waste too much time on O.J. Simpson. In my opinion, I would have loved, this is how long of a segment I would have loved about O.J. Simpson. I'm going to just reenact it. This is what my ideal would be. O.J. Simpson died. By the way, Nicole Brown Simpson was a lovely human being, and she was murdered. And Ron Goldman, who didn't do anything wrong, who was just trying to return glasses, was also murdered. And then I would talk about those two people. That's what I would do. But that's not what the media did. And Fox especially just wanted to milk this for all it was worth. Now, this clip is from Wednesday from the 5. It starts with Judge Jeanine, and then we move on to Richard Fowler. Richard Fowler is a gay black man who's in the liberal chair. I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of him because Jessica Tarloff just had a baby. Congratulations, Jessica Tarloff. But this is a clip, and again, if you know anything about the O.J. Simpson trial, you'll understand who Mark Fuhrman is. I kind of put this little short audio montage together. Trigger warning, there is a horrible racial slur in this clip. The N-word is uttered.
Then there was the undercurrent of racism in this trial that, because of Mark Fuhrman, was brought to a head. And there were so many people who were very critical of the decision by the jury here in this trial that ran for 9 months.
Despite the evidence, just because of where we were as a country and just how rife the racial tension was around the LAPD, and I think that was sort of made worse by the Mark Fuhrman tapes that had come out in the middle of the trial.
The writer who recorded conversations with Mark Fuhrman.
Anything out of a nigger's mouth for the first 5 or 6 sentences is a lie.
Of justice to the chilling confessions.
Did you see any of the boys actually killed?
Yes. On season 5 of the Fuhrman Diaries, only on Fox Nation.
Now that's a little bit of audio, so I'll just describe what happened. So I show the clips from the 5 where both Judge Jeanine and Fowler complain about the racist Mark Furman, or racism played a role because of Mark Furman. Then I show a tiny sliver of the notorious Furman tapes where he says the N-word. And then I play a short promo for the Furman Files, which is a show on Fox Nation. Oh, goodness. Now, how to unpack this. So Mark Furman was a detective for the LAPD, and he is the one who found a bloody glove and other evidence inside O.J. Simpson's home. He did not have a search warrant, and that definitely hurt his case. It hurt the prosecution's case against O.J. Simpson. And briefly what happened is Nicole Brown Simpson was murdered outside of her home. Her head was nearly decapitated. And a man who was like a waiter, a server, who she knew casually, she'd like left sunglasses or glasses. I don't even remember exactly. It doesn't really matter. He went to her home to give them back to her. And he was just wrong place, wrong time. He was also murdered. And there's just ridiculous amounts of evidence that pointed to O.J. Simpson. O.J. Simpson and had a long history of abusing Nicole Brown Simpson, his then ex-wife. There was countless, 911 call recordings where Nicole Brown Simpson was calling the police saying, he's in my house again, he's trying to kill me, he's trying to hurt me. There were police reports. There was just and like, who else would do this? Who else, especially when the violent act was so incredibly violent. The problem is the LAPD had a terrible reputation for being racist. And then Mark Furman, who again was this detective who found evidence, who didn't have a warrant when he found the evidence, had done a series of interviews with a writer about a book that she was trying to write about, like crime. And when she interviewed him, all of these crazy racial slurs came out of his mouth and horrible things about Black people and about suspects and about crime. And just, it was awful. And what happened is Mark Furman was, when he was cross-examined at the trial, part of O.J. Simpson's dream team, which was like incredibly high-powered, some of the best criminal defense attorneys in the country, basically said, have you made racial slurs in the past decade? And he said, oh, no, I haven't. And then, of course, the tapes were played, and he had. And ironically, the only person who was found guilty as part of the O.J. Simpson trial was Mark Furman. He was found guilty of perjury, and he was sentenced to 3 years probation and a $200 fine. He promptly quit the LAPD, and soon after, I'm not sure exactly when, I couldn't find the date, started working for Fox News as a contributor. And I think he had a show briefly. I wasn't paying attention to Fox in the 90s, but he's pretty much been a stalwart at Fox News ever since. I just saw him like last week. So obviously Fox didn't really have a problem hiring a cop who may or may not have been incredibly crooked and had zero problems using racial slurs. So way to go, Fox. Way to go. So I thought that was ironic that, Judge Jeanine would act like, oh, racist Mark Furman. Well, he works for the same company you do. So also want to say that if you lived through the O.J. Simpson trial, I was in college at the time. I remember distinctly where I was. It was a drugstore. And the media likes to pretend that like all Black people were for O.J. and all white people were against O.J. Simpson. That was not my experience. It really, honestly, just was kind of a big mashup, depending on how people felt about O.J. It tended to be more Black people defended him not because they really thought he wasn't guilty. It was more they didn't trust the LAPD. Mark Furman being a complete unabashed racist certainly didn't help. And I understand why they didn't trust the LAPD. I didn't hold it against anybody who, was cheering when O.J. Simpson was acquitted. I didn't. I really didn't. I still don't. And then if you saw, like, he kind of ruined that will people gave him in the years that followed as he was arrested for that, theft of his memorabilia in Vegas. He really didn't have many supporters. And then when he died, nobody seemed to really care. His actions post-trial pretty much squandered any goodwill people offered him at that point. And I just find the whole thing just a sad, ugly chapter in American history. And then if you couldn't top it, if you couldn't make it worse than basically bringing up Mark Furman and then not mentioning the fact that your same network hires him and has hired him for years and years and years, he became a very wealthy man from working on Fox News. I'm sure he made far more than he did as a detective at the LAPD. Greg Gutfeld found a way to really elevate this into something truly horrible. And here's the clip.
Justice, my lesson here is justice is wholly fallible if it can be throttled from outside forces. You can't get a fair trial, and that wasn't a fair trial to the victims. So you need to apply that lesson to now. We are in a political and a social and emotional climate where getting a fair trial is hard to get. And as much as you hate Derek Chauvin, right? You still know that trial wasn't fair, thanks to the documentary, The Fall of Minneapolis. And Michael Avenatti agrees that there's no chance for a fair trial for Trump in New York, or else the proponents wouldn't mind if you moved it outside of New York. So what I learned, it's not about the evidence in the trial, it's where you present it. It's not about what's inside the courtroom, it's about what's outside the courtroom and how it applies pressure to the judge and the jury, whether it's the threat of public chaos or media outrage. The OJ trial showed us what would and what could come when the court of public opinion trumps the actual court of law. That jury made a political decision.
So much to unpack with this one. The jury made a decision based on the fact that O.J. Simpson had an incredible defense team, like the best in the business. The prosecution was completely outgunned. They could not stand up to these people who are literally at the top of their game. The prosecution made a number of mistakes. DNA evidence was in its infancy. The DNA evidence got contaminated. Mark Furman was a complete racist pig. There was these audio tapes of him saying absolutely horrible things about black people. The LAPD had a terrible track record of treating black suspects fairly. So yeah, it was a perfect storm. And that's what happened in that trial. It wasn't the fact that, oh, these jurors, you know what, we're going to make a political statement. To bring up Derek Chauvin and to say that Derek Chauvin is somehow innocent based on O.J. Simpson makes zero sense and is just brazenly insane. The documentary that he just brought up there called The Fall of Minneapolis, I didn't see the whole thing. I've read about it. I saw clips of it. It's been largely debunked. It was made by Liz Collin, a journalist who's married to the disgraced former Minneapolis Police Federation president, Bob Kroll. Bob Kroll himself got in so much trouble for inappropriate use of force that he was banned from serving as a police officer after the ACLU of Minnesota reached a settlement with him. So he cannot work as a police officer or work with police officers for 10 years because of his excessive use of violence against demonstrators in the 2020 protests. So come on. This is just dumb propaganda. We all saw the video of Derek Chauvin murdering George Floyd. And I'm sure, nobody's 100% healthy. Other people have, they basically try to say he was on drugs and that's why he died. I don't even care. I'm not getting to humor it. We saw the video. Why are you kneeling on a person's neck when they are handcuffed? Done. We're done. We don't need to go any further than that. He was handcuffed. There's no reason to do that. He's calling out for help. We all saw it. It's horrific footage. Had it not been videotaped, I don't know if the public would have had as strong of a reaction to the murder of George Floyd. But it was videotaped, and we all saw it. And it was just, I get sick to my stomach watching it. When he calls out for his mother, I can't even handle that video. It's so disturbing and so awful. And I think, again, Greg Gutfeld, all of the men involved in the death of murder, I should say, of George Floyd had due process, were allowed to hire lawyers. They were allowed to defend themselves, and they were all found guilty in federal and state court on multiple charges. So just, promote your stupid propaganda and move on. So anyway, right about now, since about halfway through the podcast, I should give a shout out to my sponsor. And that sponsor are listeners of this podcast and readers of my Substack channel. It is not easy being a crowdsourced media project, but I am incredibly proud that I am supported by hundreds of people rather than one large donor or one large sponsor or one advertiser. Absolutely nobody's pulling my strings. Absolutely nobody's telling me what to cover, what not to cover, what to say, what not to say. And sadly, that's not always the case in media projects like this one. So I want to thank you so much. And if you'd like to become a paid subscriber to Decoding Fox News, I can always use your support. This is a very humble living. You can go to Substack for Decoding Fox News. You can go to my Patreon at Decoding Fox News. Subscriptions start at $5 a month. All paid subscribers and paid supporters get exclusive content. I just did a crazy video about a misogynist on Tucker Carlson today for paid subscribers. And if you can't afford to become a paid subscriber, I totally understand. Another way you can support the project is to share the podcast, share the newsletter, tell your friends, give me a great review, tell your cats, because I have cats and they're my mascots. And, they just, they'll be like, wow, you listen to a podcast that has cats in it? And you can say, yeah, sorta. Anyway, sometimes they meow. Sometimes you can hear them in the background. Not today. They're both very sleepy right now. Hey, Thor. Thor's sleeping right next to me. So moving on, this is just a random clip of Judge Jeanine being horribly xenophobic. Judge Jeanine!
This is done in third world countries. And by the way, I will segue very smoothly into the fact that Joe Biden has made us a third world country. Never in the history of this country have I seen people, especially in New York City, living the way they're living now, where the illegals are coming here. We're greeting them on buses. We're flying them in. They give us this false, I'm being persecuted. Give me asylum. We shake their hand. We give them a goodie bag. They come in, they take a goodie bag, and they steal everything they can from CVS. They beat up the employees at Target and at Macy's. Then they assault the police, resist arrest. There's a trail of destruction, economic devastation. And by the way, I don't think this issue got enough attention. Do you know that murders are down in Venezuela? The lowest they've been in 20 years. So maybe Donald Trump isn't so wrong about people emptying out prisons, because our crimes are going up and theirs are going down. And everything about what Joe Biden has done is defying the American law, whether it is entry to this country, staying here. And obviously, we've got to not only make sure that they are bailed whenever they're arrested, but we've got to deport them.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm going to point out that other people have pointed this out on social media, that Judge Jeanine comes from a family that fairly recently immigrated from Lebanon. And Lebanon is an absolute disaster right now. Its economy is completely collapsed. The countries have many, many problems. People are completely desperate for work, for income. They break into banks to get their own money out of them. Not kidding on that one. It's just Lebanon is an absolute disaster. It's also engaged in some kind of back and forth via Hezbollah and northern Israel. There's been, rockets fired, airstrikes, the whole nine yards. It's not a great situation. So you'd think that maybe she'd have some self-awareness that, my family escaped a bad situation. But no, that's not how they play it on Fox. Her language also is, very, we shake their hand. We give them a goodie bag. They come in, take the goodie bag, and steal everything they can from CVS. So every undocumented immigrant is stealing from CVS. Every undocumented immigrant is somehow a criminal, according to Judge Jeanine. I guess they are. And then she mentions that kind of wacky theory about Venezuela that absolutely no one has proven yet. Basically, Trump drops that a lot in his speeches and rallies, and Fox has just picked it up and run with it. No proof whatsoever. I haven't seen anything about Venezuela emptying their prisons into the United States. But, they're going to just repeat it anyway. And I'll do a quick Judge Jeanine, since you guys want me to do Judge Jeanine all the time. I have to move back from my microphone. I have to move back from my microphone. I'm Judge Jeanine, And I don't care about what you're saying about migrants. I know that they're coming into this country to steal everything that's not nailed down. Why? Because they're criminals. And criminals are wired that way. And I'm worried that one day they might take my York peppermint patties. Or perhaps a box of wine. I don't drink, although I drink. You know, I've said conflicting things about this on that show. And I'm Judge Janine. And how dare you say that I'm loud or abrasive? Because I'm not. I'm a delicate, petite flower who is beloved by the Fox News audience. I mean, I find her entertaining. I'll say that. I don't agree with most of what comes out of her mouth. Occasionally, every now and then, she'll stand up for women or shoot a nasty comment to Gutfelder or Jesse Waters, and I'm like, yay! And then I'm like, oh no, she just said something awful again. Judge Janine. Next up, we have a woman that is not, I don't know if this is probably a first on Decoding Fox News. She's from Fox Business, which has a much smaller audience than Fox, but she was making an appearance on Fox and Friends on Thursday last week. Her name is Jackie DeAngelis. She's young. She's, kind of spunky. And maybe that's insulting to call her spunky, but that's what I'm calling her. And this is a clutch of pearls moment when someone on Fox gets upset about something that Donald J. Trump did all the time, or another Republican. But at this point, there are no other Republicans. It's all about Donald J. Trump. All about everything is about that man with the orange face and the weird puffy eyes and the strange ears that are always white and the bad suits that don't fit him and the comments and the craziness. Anyway, last week also, if you're a follower of Decoding Fox News, I posted a media clip that actually showed Greg Gutfeld take his hand in a hand gesture to his collarbone as if, ladies and gentlemen, as if he was clutching his pearls. Even though he didn't have any pearls, but true story. That clip wasn't as good as this clip, so I'm not including it, and it was a visual. It was a visual joke, but he actually put his hand up to his collarbone as he said, I'm so offended. And I'm like, clutching your pearls. So anyway, moving on. This is what she said, Jackie DeAngelis, about Joe Biden.
He's standing there and he's promising the American people that we're going to get a rate cut, although he says we don't know what the Fed would do. But, Joe, are you pressuring the Fed by putting that out there?
Now, I'll explain this very briefly. So DeAngelis is basically criticizing Joe Biden for not treating the Fed as an independent governing body because Biden made a comment about the Feds possibly making cuts. Now, in his defense, the Federal Reserve Chairman has made several statements over the past few months about making cuts to the interest rate in 2024. They had said 3 cuts. They said maybe cuts, 2 cuts. It's been kind of blurry. So I don't think Biden was really speaking out of hand there. Here's a collection of Donald J. Trump making comments about the Federal Reserve.
The Fed is making a mistake. They're so tight. I think the Fed has gone crazy. But I think the Fed has gone crazy. Okay, I'll see you in a little while. I really disagree with what the Fed is doing.
The attacks on the Federal Reserve and its chair, Janet Yellen, have been unprecedented, coming from a Republican presidential nominee, and they have stunned Washington insiders.
I believe the Fed is very political. It's become very political.
Donald Trump has opened up a new
man in the Fed. I don't necessarily agree with it because he's raising interest rates.
The Fed has raised interest rates twice this year and is indicating perhaps even twice more in 2018.
I'm not thrilled because, we go up, and every time you go up, they want to raise rates again.
I did this despite a near record number of rate increases and quantitative tightening by the Federal Reserve since I won the election. 8 increases in total, which were, in my opinion, far too fast an increase and far too slow.
So yes, the president is not supposed to try to manipulate the Federal Reserve. They're not supposed to try to dictate what the Federal Reserve does. They're not supposed to criticize the Federal Reserve. Donald J. Trump did all of those things, and he still talks about the Federal Reserve like he can just, turn a switch on and they'll do whatever he wants. He does that in rallies and speeches. He doesn't talk about them as much now that he's not president, but everything he did in those clips is completely inappropriate. So for them to act like, Biden kind of implying there might be cuts when the Federal Reserve has said repeatedly that there will be cuts is it just completely out. What are we doing? I mean, it's that whole idea of like Trump could go, I'm going to destroy the country and be a dictator forever. And they're like, well, you're taking him out of context. You're taking him out of context. And see, look at Biden. Biden's old. He's walking slowly. So there you go. There you go. It's literally, I'm just being driven mad. This next clip is about someone that I predicted Fox would go after months ago. And they have a couple times. This is kind of one of their maybe second or third shots at this representative. She is an absolute superstar. I feel bad that I've been spelling her name wrong. I spelled Jasmine with an S, and it's actually Jasmine with a Z. And I had no idea. I don't have the world's greatest vision, so I can't always see things on a screen. That's why I make a lot of typos. It drives me crazy. But anyway, I am talking about none other than Representative Jasmine Crockett from Texas. She's a Democrat. She is a superstar. I love this woman. I love her outfits. I love how quick-witted she is. She's very funny. She's very smart. She's on top of her game. I'm like, I just can't wait. I hope her career continues to just skyrocket, make her Senator Crockett, maybe not from Texas, but you never know. You never know. She is that amazing. So, what happened last week is she was on a podcast and she made a comment that was very like off the cuff. And the comment was, I don't have the audio for it. I'm just going to read it. She says, one of the things they propose is black folk not have to pay taxes for a certain amount of time. I don't know if that's necessarily a bad idea. Then she immediately says, well, there's a lot of low-income Americans that don't even pay taxes, so And she says it just like, whatever. She was talking about she heard a celebrity say this. Now, Fox took this as she was seriously proposing legislation on the House floor. Like it had made it out of committee. like this wouldn't even make it out of committee. But she'd made it out of committee, and she was like championing reparations for slavery through black people not paying taxes, which is not at all what happened. They were misrepresenting this kind of offhanded comment that she made on a podcast. The tax thing is a little funky. I have a ton of hyperlinks in the newsletter over this. Yes, some lower income Americans don't pay federal income tax, but that doesn't mean they don't pay taxes. That's a misnomer. That's not true. So about 40% of U.S. lower income households don't pay individual income tax, but they also pay things like payroll taxes, local real estate taxes if they own property. They pay sales taxes, they pay local taxes, they pay state taxes. So what happens basically is if your income is so low that you also get refundable tax credits, you basically don't pay federal taxes. The only time I've ever not paid federal taxes was when I was in grad school and my income was $0 because they don't count student loans as income. They understand that that's not like you're not working, that you're going to pay that back and that it's not considered income. So as a self-employed person, I pay a ton of money in taxes, but you basically have to be on the very, very bottom of the economic ladder. And usually a lot of that is people who have children because you're allowed to write off your children as a deduction. And then there's different tax credits you can get when you have children. So this is poor people with little kids. This is not like people scamming. And according to the Pew Research Center, the most recent tax cuts by George W. Bush and Donald J. Trump have benefited the highest earners, not lower income Americans. And I have a hyperlink to that. I wanted to include it, but it didn't fit. They had a whole specific with breakdowns of everything. But if you want to check it out, the hyperlink is in the newsletter. And then also according to the Tax Policy Center, about 60% of the lowest income Americans pay payroll tax. So, of course, the cast of the five, including Jesse Waters, took her offhanded comment as if she was proposing something serious, which she was not, and ran with it. And this is Jesse Waters, one of the strangest arguments against slavery reparations I've ever heard uttered by anyone.
I always thought that if there were 750,000 Americans who died in the Civil War to give freedom to African Americans, and that's a lot of death. Now they want 170 years later, they want a check. That's an amazing ask after all that death. That's the deadliest war in American history. And so if it takes an apology, that's something that I'm sure the United States would do. I don't see why they haven't done it already, offer an apology. But I would ask, do you want a check for a few $1,000s, or do you want a father who's in your life and married to your mother? Because if you have a father in your life, that check's gone after you cash it. You will, if you have a father, that is the single most determinative factor to financial success in this country. And that's what it should be about.
So to briefly break that down, number one, the government can't force anybody to be your father. That's lunacy. I don't know why you're bringing that up. It's also incredibly racist to promote racist tropes about black fathers. I don't know what point you're trying to make there. Plenty of white people are raised without fathers as well. Asian, Latino, the whole nine yards. That's not, unique to the black community. I also want to say that the number that he used of 750,000 American deaths, soldiers' deaths, I guess, in the Civil War, I found that in one source. I found several other sources that listed it at what I remembered, 620,000. Of that, the majority were Union, so 360,000 Union soldiers and 258 Confederate soldiers. And of the Union soldiers, about 40,000 of them were African American or black soldiers. So what are you really arguing there? That the Confederate deaths should also be included in? Those were people who were fighting to keep slavery intact, basically, in the South. So those deaths should be included with the Union, and then the black deaths you're just going to ignore. Okay. Also, people pointed out on social media that the total number of deaths in the Civil War was about 2.5% of the population, which today would be millions. Got it. But what people left out is that enslaved people in the United States at that time was around 4 million people, or 13% of the population. So I'm sorry, that's a much, much larger number. Yes, the Civil War was horrible. No one's glorifying it or saying it was a wonderful thing. It was horrible. A lot of people died. But being enslaved for your entire life, multiple generations, is a horror that is difficult to even begin to describe. The first slaves were imported in 1619 when 20 Africans were brought over in a Dutch ship to the British colonies. Over the course of the next 200 years, roughly 600,000 African slaves were imported into what would become the United States. Although Congress banned the slave trade in 1808, it did not ban the practice of slavery, and by the time the Civil War started, the U.S. was home to 4 million enslaved people. Following the Civil War, black Americans were deprived of voting rights in many states due to Jim Crow laws. They also faced harassment, discrimination, and racially motivated violence. Redlining destroyed urban areas, while banks denied black Americans housing loans and other means to gain wealth and stability. Black Americans make up, still today, a disproportionate amount of incarcerated people in the United States. I could go on. I could do 10 podcasts. It's a lot more than the deaths in the Civil War. You have to see that. And if you're not seeing that, I don't know what's wrong with you. I'm not, slavery reparations are incredibly controversial, but he did not offer even that was not even close to an argument against them. Not even close. Not even close. So just insulting, really, because you're lumping in Confederate soldiers with Union soldiers. You leave out that some of the Union soldiers were black Americans. You're leaving out the just horrendously huge number of enslaved people and the horrors of multiple generations. That's one thing that haunts me about the practice of slavery, is that somebody would be born as a baby into slavery and die as an old man in slavery and never, ever have the chance to know basic human rights. You cannot just sweep that under the rug and act like it didn't happen. It did happen. We're still dealing with it. It's like the original sin of this country. I'm getting all worked up. I sometimes surprise myself on this podcast that I get worked up about a certain topic, but that one really does enrage me because I can't help but think of just what it's done to this country, that we still pay for it every day, that people are still harmed by the legacy of all of the things that I just described. And I'm just barely scraping the top of that one. Again, 10 podcasts. I could do 10 podcasts on that. Moving on to stories Fox News ignored every week. I compare the hours I've watched on Fox News to 5 hours of the PBS NewsHour. The following list are stories that PBS covered that Fox News did not. I will add very quickly, Fox seemed to acknowledge that the Israel-Hamas conflict was happening last week, which they've been ignoring that for weeks. So this is a short list for that one. Updates to the Israel-Hamas war. The IDF said that 468 aid trucks entered Gaza, the largest single-day aid delivery since the conflict started 6 months ago. PBS produced a segment on how Palestinians are celebrating the Muslim holidays of Ramadan and Eid al-Fitr during the Israel-Hamas conflict. The segment focused on Palestinians inside and outside of war-torn Gaza. Updates in the war in Ukraine. Russia and Ukraine blamed each other for drone attacks on a nuclear power plant. Although the plant was built by Ukrainians, it is currently in Russian-occupied territory. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry main intelligence directorate has confirmed that Ukraine hit an aviation training center just across the Russian border. David Cameron, the British Foreign Secretary, met with President Biden and Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. He also met with Congress on Tuesday, where both Blinken and Cameron urged lawmakers to approve new military aid for Ukraine. PBS produced a segment about how the Russian military has targeted both the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and Protestant churches throughout Ukraine. The Russian government views any faith other than Russian Orthodox Church as a threat to its sovereignty. Ukraine's parliament passed a new controversial law that is meant to boost conscription and prevent draft dodging as the war drags on. Russian airstrikes destroyed a major power plant outside of Kyiv. Climate disasters, we're back onto those. Flooding in Central Asia and southern Russia has killed dozens of people and caused hundreds of thousands to evacuate to higher ground. The flooding has been caused by excessive rain, which most experts have linked to man-made climate change. An EU human rights court found that the Swiss government has not done enough to protect its citizens from the negative effects of climate change. More than 2,000 senior-aged women filed the lawsuit. The EU Copernicus Climate Change Service found that this past March was the hottest March on record, and the last 10 months ranked as the world's hottest on record. So that's alarming. The Vatican issued a 20-page doctrine condemning surrogacy and transgender ideology. It put both on par with abortion and euthanasia. Over 100 people died in a ferry accident off the coast of Mozambique. The boat was overloaded with people fleeing an alleged cholera outbreak. The panic was caused by misinformation. The Biden administration announced a $6.6 billion to ensure that the state of semiconductor chips are manufactured in the U.S. During the pandemic, shortages of foreign-made semiconductor chips caused problems across the supply chain, especially in the auto industry. Uber and Lyft have said they will both leave the Minneapolis area after a minimum pay ordinance for ride-share drivers that the city council voted to approve last week. PBS produced a segment about how a bipartisan group of former senior officials are urging lawmakers on Capitol Hill to rein in the president's ability to deploy the U.S. military within the country through a provision in the century-old Insurrection Act. The EPA will require 200 chemical plants to reduce pollution that is likely to cause cancer. An appeals court upheld a decision that would allow the state of California to have its own emission standards. The train company, Norfolk Southern, reached a $600 million settlement with the residents of East Palestine, Ohio. The company is responsible for a train derailment that resulted in a controlled burn of toxic substances in 2023. Last week marked the 30th anniversary of the genocide in Rwanda. An estimated 800,000 people were killed by government-backed extremists. PBS produced a segment that went into the history of the racially motivated killings and how the country has moved forward. The European Parliament voted in favor of a major overhaul of laws regarding migration after years of deadlock. The package aims to spread the burden of immigration across all of the EU states and provide better pathways for asylum seekers while providing an easier method to deport unsuccessful claimants. 6 former police officers in Mississippi were given prison sentences from 15 to 45 years for torturing black men as part of what they called the Goon Squad. Track and field becomes the first Olympic sport to offer winners prize money. Gold medalists will receive $50,000 in the Paris Olympics. The EPA issued new standards for the removal of forever chemicals from U.S. drinking water. PBS produced a segment as part of its America at a Crossroads series that explored the political divide between rural and urban America. The Biden administration tries to close the gun show loophole that allows some buyers to purchase firearms without a federal background check. The celebrity chef David Chang said he will no longer enforce its trademark for the term chili crisp for his Momofuku brand. His company faced widespread backlash from smaller brands who claimed the term referred to a commonly used Asian condiment. Shohei Ohtani's former interpreter has been criminally charged for stealing $16 million from the baseball player. The U.S. Navy engaged with joint drills with Japan and the Philippines. The Prime Minister of Japan also met with the Biden administration last week. The diplomatic and military partnerships were meant as a sign of strength against China's increasing aggression towards its neighbors. The Russian government has employed a political influence campaign to attempt to meddle in European elections. The scandal revolves around a website called Voice of Europe that critics say is covert propaganda and a mouthpiece for the Kremlin. Akabono, a Hawaiian-born sumo wrestler, has died at the age of 54. He was the first foreigner to attain the highest ranking in Japan's national sport. He died of heart failure in a Tokyo hospital. Robert McNeil, co-founder of the McNeil-Lehrer Report, died at the age of 93. The show McNeil founded went on to become the PBS NewsHour. Robert McNeil, known by many as Robin, rose to fame during the Watergate scandal. He was the co-anchor of the McNeil-Lehrer Report for 20 years. By the numbers, that's a lot of stories. Now, of course, the death of Robert McNeil was a huge deal on PBS NewsHour because he's the founder of the show. So by the numbers, each week I compare Fox News to the PBS NewsHour. I go over the top 5 topics discussed on each network, starting with Fox. Number 1, blatant shilling for Trump, 10%. Biden bashing, 6%. The total eclipse, 5%. O.J. Simpson's death, 5%. And the border crisis, 5%. PBS NewsHour. Robert McNeil Memorial, 9%. Israel-Hamas war, 8%. The divide between rural and urban America, that was 5%. That was America at a Crossroads. Ukraine war, 5%. And the total eclipse, 4%. Words used on Fox for the week ending April 14th, 2024. Trump, 259. Biden, 244. Crime, this is way up, 105. Border, 75. Israel, 65. They're actually talking about the conflict again. Inflation, 64. Migrant, 56. O.J. Simpson, 44 times. Economy, 40. China, 28. Iran, 16. Hunter, only 11. Jasmine Crockett, 4. And AOC, 3. And that's the podcast. I'm exhausted. If you'd like to follow Decoding Fox News on other social media, you can follow me at X, formerly known as Twitter, Threads, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Facebook. On Facebook and YouTube, it's my name, Juliet Jeske. If you'd like to become a sponsor of Decoding Fox News, I could always use the help. You can go to my Substack for Decoding Fox News, Patreon for Decoding Fox News. The podcast mascots, Odin and Thor, they're both cats, also send their love. And you can also find this podcast on YouTube at the Resolute Square YouTube channel. There are the media division of the Lincoln Project. Basically also I just want to say, pro-democracy. It's not really about a political party or political affiliation. It's the pro-democracy movement, which I'm very proudly a part of. Thank you so much. I will see you at the next podcast.
Resolute Square.